I'm just waiting for it to start. What's up, people, and welcome to another episode of the I Am Conquering Mountains podcast. I'm your host, Charles Phillips, also known as I Am Conquering Mountains. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guest that I'm so excited to connect with today. This individual, I met him through a mutual friend of ours, who was also on the podcast as well, Janine Hernandez. We did our first episode, and when I heard this individual's story, man, I was speechless. He has a lot of mountains that he has conquered and continues to conquer. He's also inspiring many other people to conquer many mountains that they're facing as well. He is an inspirational speaker. He is a retired naval intelligence officer, former Fortune 300 company executive, mental health advocate, where he is inspiring his audience to not allow their history to define their legacy. He also shares his stories of triumphs that stem from his childhood, the traumatic experience he experienced during his childhood. He also shares his stories and tangible approaches with audiences to create a mentality of healing, purpose, and success. He is the #1 best-selling author of the book titled Monsters in My House, A True Story. And I want to give a warm, warm, warm welcome and introduce you all to Mr. Walt McKinley.
Charles, what's going on? Thank you for having me on today. I appreciate you, brother. Like, just the I Am Conquering Mountains. As soon as I even just heard the name of the podcast, I just knew we had to connect. We had to collaborate because your
Absolutely.
mindset by the name of your podcast tells me that it's the exact same as mine. So I love it. Thank you for allowing me the blessing to be on your show today and to reach your listeners. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for participating, because you have a story that unfortunately a lot of people can relate to. You know, your story is, familiar with a lot of individuals. I'm a school counselor as well, and I've had students who have experienced a lot of the things, or some of the things that you have experienced as well too. So I wanted to ask you, in your book title, Monsters in My House, you have like the subtitle of A True Story. When you share your story, are people like left in awe, or like, is it like, man, I can't believe this guy went through this?
I think it's all of it, right? And
Right.
so my story isn't even about the trauma, although it was
Mhm,
horrific. I was sadistically abused. I'm sure we'll get into some of that stuff, but it
mhm,
was about the triumph and the comeback and teaching people that their history doesn't define their legacy. Where they started
mhm,
doesn't have to be where they end. And the biggest blessing that I've gotten from writing this book, because it wasn't an ego thing, I wasn't even going to write it.
mhm.
We talk later about how I ended up
Yeah.
doing that. But it was more about what it could do for people and how it could
Mhm.
not necessarily even inspire them, but pour the belief into people that if I can overcome, if I can live triumphantly, if I can do these things, then so can they. The only thing
Mhm.
separating the two of us is the choice to not allow fear to keep us paralyzed, and to run through that and embrace the fear, because the other side of that fear and that darkness that we all live in from time to time is
Mhm.
light and abundance and happiness and success. And so, yeah, it's been, I think, awe-inspiring for some people. Some people like, I can't believe you went through this. A lot of
Right,
people have
right.
read it in one day, believe it or not. And then other
Mhm.
people have had to take time and take chunks because it
Right,
resonates
right.
with them so much. But they
Mhm,
get healing and they get power and they start owning their story in a different way when they're done,
mhm.
because they chose to read my book and then they chose to fight for themselves and their story and their power. So it's been a beautiful kind of like full circle life
Yeah.
event that's happened. And it's just a blessing, bro.
I can imagine, man. And I love the comment that you make about you don't have to let your history define your legacy. That is so impactful and powerful. I often tell my students that, you might not be able to control the obstacles you go through right now, but you do control the outcome. We often, in my motto for my business is be the outcome, because we can't
Mm.
control all the struggles that we go through, but we can control how we come out of it. And it sounds like a lot of the things that you went through, you kind of had that same mindset that what I've been through is not going to define me, but I'm going to kind of build my own journey as I make my way out of it. How difficult was that task to not allow those things that you went through to keep you in a dark state, or hinder you from your progress?
It was difficult. Look, like, make no bones about it. It takes effort, it takes work, it
Mhm.
takes intentionality to really heal from life's traumas. And all of us have them or know somebody who's went through life's trauma, not just child abuse. It's divorced parents, it's losing a
Right.
parent, it's losing a child, it's a car accident that causes PTSD. It's not
Right.
just one thing. And so we all have a choice to say, like, life happens for us, not to us, and really have that attitude of what's my lesson I'm supposed to learn, or how can I use this experience not only to
Mhm.
empower myself, but to empower other people. And I got to tell you, Charles, like, I say your history doesn't define your legacy, and is really the rallying cry for my own life.
Mhm.
But there was a time when my history did define my legacy. When I
Mhm.
testified against my father in court at 16 years old. He was convicted of felony child abuse. I moved
Mhm.
in with my aunt, and I was getting this love and attention I needed, and it felt amazing. But I was still angry and full of pain and shame and embarrassment that I hadn't worked through. And so I
Mhm.
fought a lot. Almost robbed a store. Was 2 days away from robbing a store. We had ski masks, guns, the whole nine.
Mhm.
And in those moments, my history was defining my legacy. I was the stereotype. So although I wasn't being abused anymore at that point,
Mhm.
I was victimizing myself over and over again. And so I had a choice, like, because I'd say I'm not a victim, I'm a warrior, right? I'm not a survivor, I'm a
Right.
warrior, I'm a fighter. Like everybody who's been here watching this, who has been through things in their life, like they are warriors, own that power. But in those
Mhm.
moments, I was victimized, but I
Mhm.
was also being a victim too, and continuing to victimize myself. And I had to make a choice. Although I was victimized, I don't have to stay in that space and continue to just beat myself up and live in that pain and shame and anger. I
Mhm.
have a choice to do things differently. And then I set out upon this path to do that. And it didn't happen overnight. It took me years to
Right.
get to where I'm at today. But it all started with one choice to say, I need to do something different if I want results that are different than what I'm getting today.
Mhm. And what led you to make that choice?
For me, it was, so I talked about I almost robbed a store at 19. So I testified
Mhm.
against my father in court at 16. Life was really good after that. My stutter subsided, my grades
Okay.
improved. I finished high school. I felt love for the first time in my life. I mean, I had been abused by every adult in my life, foster parents, real
Mm.
parents, step parents, for the first
Wow.
16 years that I was alive. Things like locked in basements and chained to beds, and a lot more than that, even.
Mercy.
And I right before we went to go rob the Circle K convenience store, like I said, we had guns, we had ski masks, we had all of that. This is
Mhm.
divine intervention, but it's life happening for me in this moment, not to me. And I didn't
Right.
realize it then. By the way,
Mhm.
my buddy's mother called, or his sibling called and said, mom's sick, and he lived 5 hours away from where I lived at,
Mhm.
and he took off. Like I took him to the truck stop. He hitchhiked home and took off. And in this moment, I had a couple days to really think to myself. And it was like
Mhm.
God on one shoulder, the devil on the other,
Right.
feeding into my ear in this moment, right? It's like pain and shame and anger and everything over here. And it's like
Mhm.
on the God side, it's knowing that I'm a better person, knowing that I deserve more. And so, and then, that's feeding into both sides of me. And in that moment, I had to make a decision. I went and talked to my grandmother. She talked to me about going in the military. And instead of
Mhm.
allowing fear of the unknown and the fear of not knowing anybody and the fear of like starting a brand new life and the fear of getting out of my comfortable space, even though I was in pain, seeing all the places I was
Mhm.
abused my whole childhood, I chose to go into the military. And that was one of the most defining moments of my life, because that is where my success story started to truly catapult.
Mhm.
And so a lot of work before then, a lot happening before then, but that was a very pivotal moment, a choice I made to say, I'm going to choose me.
Mhm.
I'm going to choose me. And then I chose it. And then I moved forward in my life after that.
Wow, that's powerful, man. That's powerful. So, like, as you were when you testified against your father at 16 years old,
Mhm.
um, what was it like preparing for that? Because I have students who often worry about, they want the abuse to stop, they want the things that's happening to them to stop, and they'll
Mhm.
share that with me, but then they don't want me to tell anyone because or report it because they're fear of something worse happening, or even though they have this parent or this guardian abusing them, it's like they don't want to, kind of take that away either. And they don't want that person to get in trouble. And because of the fear of, something worse happening. And, one of the things that they fear most is having to go to court and actually testify
Mhm.
against, their parent or their guardian who's abusing them. So how did you prepare for that?
So I think I want to give a couple snippets before I get to that piece, because I think this is
Okay.
important. And I hope that some of your students can watch this,
Mhm.
right? And I hope that I can breathe this power into them, and that
Mhm.
fear that paralyzes you in those moments. You know, at 10 years old, my sister ran away because of horrific thing my father was doing to her too.
Mhm.
And the cops came to the school. I had
Mhm.
counselors talk to us, two police officers. They really tried to just show me that they were the safe space.
Right.
I didn't trust them because every adult I had ever known had horrifically hurt me
Right.
before that moment. And I had a chance to speak my truth, and I had a chance to share in that moment, but I was paralyzed by the fear of
Mm.
the moment. So I didn't say anything. I went back to the comfortable pain that I knew, the only thing that I knew, even
Mhm.
though it was abusive, even though I hated it, it was
Right.
comfortable for me in those moments because the fear of the unknown paralyzed me.
Right.
At 13, I almost took my own life.
Mm.
My dad took his girlfriend to Disneyland. He said, I'm not taking you because I love her. So why would I take you?
Wow.
And left me at home at 13 for the weekend by myself. Almost took my own life.
Mm.
I had a chance to tell, but I was scared because he said, if I tell anybody that I'm there by myself, he'll kill me when he gets back.
Mhm.
And I thought he would.
Yeah.
And so I had a choice to try to do something that I couldn't because of fear paralyzed me. And by the way, when you're a kid, you don't stop loving your parent, you stop loving yourself. And so it's
Mhm.
tough at 15 now to turn my father in and have him arrested.
Right.
And by the way, 30 years ago, CPS, bro, like CPS, my aunt and I called him. She's the youngest sister of 8. He's the oldest brother.
Mhm.
So now we're going to battle, right?
Yeah.
She filed a complaint with CPS. They said they were going to do a health and welfare check. He, luckily it only made it 2 days before he punched me in my face in front of 5 of my friends in the whole city street. And in that moment, I had a choice to make to fight for me. And this is the first time I ever fought for me.
Mhm.
Instead of allowing the fear to make me regress because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I didn't know if I would end in a foster home that would abuse me again like they did when I was little. I didn't know if I would go with my mother that I hadn't even seen at 5 years at this point. I just
Mm.
didn't know. And
Mm.
so he's got arrested. I went to court to him. What I will tell you is because I chose to speak my truth in the moment when I ran and called my aunt, who called the cops to have him arrested for
Mhm.
child abuse. In the courtroom, it was easier to do the second time. It wasn't easy, it was easier to do.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting in the courtroom. My dad's berating me. The judge has already warned him once he's going to hold him in contempt because
Mhm.
he's defending himself. And he's trying to get me to say I'm lying. He's calling me
Mhm.
a liar on the witness stand.
Yeah.
And it was like 16 years of pain and anger and shame and like frustration and like being pissed off came out. And I
Mm.
said, you're lying. You know what you did to me. You've been beating me since day one. And he goes, boy. And he yelled out. And the judge said, Mr. McKinley, I have heard enough. And
Mm.
I'm bawling. I'm crying.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm
Right.
stuttering because I had a stutter at that age because I was so timid and scared.
Mhm.
And I'm bawling. And he stops the proceedings there. Boom. 2 seconds later, he's saying my dad's guilty of felony child abuse and he gave custody to my aunt at 16.
Mm.
But here's the thing, even if I didn't have my aunt, because there's a lot of kids out there that don't have somebody.
Right.
There's a lot of people out there that don't have an Aunt Diana like I had to take me
Mhm.
in at 16 years old and show me love for the first time in my life. Fear will stop you and keep you in a place that leaves you in tumultuousness, that leaves you in pain and shame and despair. And you live in that quiet desperation. And you might even wear a mask when you go outside and people think that you're fine.
Mhm.
But the reality is, every single time in my life resume, and if you look at your life resume, I'm sure you could say the same. Every single time I ran through the fear, every single time I embraced the fear, every single time I went through that dark tunnel I felt like was there. On the other side of that was light and abundance and joy and like everything I thought I could have,
Right.
or an extraordinarily valuable lesson that made me better the next time. And so it's never been a failure. There's never been a lack of lessons or abundance on the other side of running through fear. But it took me 16 years of my life until I did it for the first time. And it's catapulted me in my entire life until I'm 45 now,
Mhm.
because I don't get scared to run through the fear anymore. Every time you do it, it gets easier.
Yeah.
Every time you do it, you see like the action created results, which increase my belief to run through the fear the next time. And it just perpetuates
Mhm.
in this beautiful cycle. And so, if I can implore anybody, it's like run through the fear, no matter what the decision is, whether it's child abuse or anything else. Run through the fear,
Mhm.
embrace it, learn the lessons, get better, continue to go through that, and you'll find like all those things that you're looking for are really on the other side of that.
Did it feel like, did the love you were getting from the first time from your aunt, did it feel like weird at first? Because I'll tell you why I'm asking. When I first moved out of my parents' home, and I moved to Maryland, with my wife, it I got homesick because I was so used to the constant worry about bills and moving from place to place and the evictions that was coming, and the verbal abuse and the domestic violence and stuff like that. I was so used to that like now I move with my wife and I'm like, hey, nobody arguing, nobody's like worried
Mhm.
about somebody's reaction. It felt weird. Like I kind of wanted to go back to that. Like, did it feel odd to you coming out of that at first?
It does. I mean, you end up how to survive in the chaos.
Yeah.
And by the way, your ability to survive in the chaos when you're younger will help you thrive
Mhm.
in uncertain times or ambiguity in adult life if you do the healing work,
Yeah.
right? But in those moments, my aunt just touching me on my shoulder, I couldn't, like, I would flinch. I couldn't
Mhm.
embrace somebody. I couldn't hug somebody. Like, if I met you right now, what's up, bro? I give you a hug.
Right,
That's
right.
who I am, right?
Yeah.
In those moments, I didn't even know how to accept love.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to accept positive physical touch. I didn't know how to go to a store because we went hungry so much and buy something. The
Mhm.
first time my aunt took me to the grocery store after I moved in with her, she tells a story. She cries every time. She said, "You knew how much we spent down to a nickel."
Wow.
And I told her at the register, I can't remember the amount now, but let's say it's 100
Mhm.
even, right? I'm like, it's going to be $100. She goes, and it was $100.05.
Wow.
And she goes, I made you feel special. Like, she's like, you're so smart. I can't, wow, you just managed that. This,
Yeah.
she goes, but my heart broke because the whole time we were walking through the store, you were calculating in your head because you knew what it was like to go hungry, and you knew
Mhm.
what it was like to live on the street, and you knew what it was like to live in that chaos, or if you spent too much you would get hit.
Mhm.
And she goes, so it took me, it was like deprogramming, which I that's what you're talking about too. It's like
Mhm.
deprogramming yourself. There's an alternative way. And that's why people like us sharing our stories, and Janine
Right.
and other people that I know too, removing the
Mhm.
stigma of trauma and showing people and putting the belief in them that there's a different way, and having candid discussions is so important.
So for educators like myself working with kids who have these traumatic experiences, how can we help them to deprogram?
I think there's a couple things. I think it's awareness. It
Mhm.
takes an intentionality. And by the way, educators are swamped. You guys are underpaid, you're undervalued. Not only are you dealing with kids who have been through traumas, or just
Mhm.
they're just kids being
Right.
kids,
Right.
but you're also dealing with parents who've been through traumas that don't want to show up and be the parents they need to be in their kids' life, so that there's more structure and there's more they're more calm, right? That they're not
Mhm.
in the chaotic situation and programming when they still get to school. So first, I empathize with the plight
Mhm.
of educators, and the value of what you guys are bringing, raising our generations is amazing. And I wish that we could do something more about that. But
Mhm.
I think it's intentionality. It's the moments that, like, they see a kid that was talking and playing and they see him regress. They
Mhm.
see grades start to come down. They see a kid that is fidgeting and they can't seem to like zero in on it. They see a kid who's like getting pissed off every day. And I'll tell you why this is an important piece of the story. Get pissed off every day at 10 a.m. because they're starving, because they don't get food
Yeah.
at home. And
Right.
instead of thinking like, Johnny's, acting a fool in here, like he's misbehaving and getting frustrated, it's doing a little digging.
Mhm.
I get the challenge of the timing. My brother-in-law is an educator for
Okay.
special education in California. And he, I think he's like dean of students now, but he was a teacher.
Mhm.
And every day at 10, this little boy would get upset. Every day at 10. And the other teachers were getting pissed. Like,
Mhm.
he's misbehaving. They wanted to suspend him. They wanted to expel him because he couldn't get it together.
Right.
So my brother-in-law pulls him out in the hallway and it's like, what's wrong? And he's like, oh, I'm just mad. He's like, no, what's wrong? Like, really asking him, like, I
Right.
can't
Digging
help you
for
if
that
you
deeper
don't
meaning.
tell me what's wrong. Like, tell
Mhm.
me what's wrong. And he goes, I'm just hungry.
Mm.
And he goes, well, did you get to eat breakfast? And he goes, I don't ever get to eat breakfast. The only time I get to eat is here.
Mm.
And he goes, okay, so what if every day at 10 o'clock we get the cafeteria to give you a little snack.
Mhm.
And he's like, okay. And do you know that kid's grades improved?
Wow.
That kid's whole demeanor improved. And now he's one of the star students there
Mm.
because somebody took the intentionality and looked beyond what's right in front of them to dig a
Right.
little bit deeper. So it's not always poor grades, attitude, acting out. Sometimes it's the regression, and you see a kid, or you walk past them, and they flinch. So it's like always being aware of the things that we could easily miss that aren't
Mhm.
always in your face, and then not allowing us to say, "Well, it's not my problem. I shouldn't step in." It's all of our. It's up to all of us. We have a responsibility as a human kind, not just teachers. I'm talking me, everybody,
Mhm.
to do something to help
Right.
that
Mm.
child so we don't have children who grow up to be adults who have been hurt, who perpetuate the generational cycle of abuse to
Right.
the tune of 78% of the time in families,
Mm.
and that we've seen since the start of history. So it really is on all of us to make those decisions to do something about that.
Yeah, I definitely understand. And I love the story that you shared too, about your brother, about him, giving the kids something to eat or even just asking him what's wrong, but trying to dig for that deeper meaning. We can oftentimes see students who are doing that regression or they're acting out in a certain way or they're trying to be the class clown because that love, that laughter that
Mhm.
they get is the only kind of, love or a good feeling or feeling of appreciation and acceptedness
Yeah.
that they get throughout, the day, throughout their lives. And also, I think that like with the food thing, the kid not eating, we adults, we get angry when we don't eat. It's like we get hangry. Hanger is a real
Uh-huh.
thing. So
Hmm.
when we have those situations where students are going through those type of situations and they're hungry or they're being abused at home, we have to provide some kind of intervention. During those times. When you were growing up, was there a time where someone outside of the time that you mentioned about I don't remember how old you were when the CPS came to the school. How
Yeah.
old were you
10.
then? 10.
I was
Okay.
10. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, do you remember like when the abuse started as you were growing up?
It started from the time I was a toddler. I mean, by the time we
Wow.
were 2 years old, well, first my mother ran from my father because he was extremely
Mhm.
abusive. He had been through traumas in his childhood. Like
Right.
he was
Right.
molested by a man at 16 years old. Like he had been
Mhm.
through things that he was so scared of unlocking that he never
Right.
worked through, healed
Mhm.
from, and so he created the generational cycle. Well, my mother had been through things too, and
Mhm.
so but she reacted more by regressing and neglect, and like even though she wanted to love at full
Mhm.
capacity, she didn't have the ability to do so.
Yeah.
And what's great is she's an amazing success story today, but back then she wasn't. And so by the time we were 2 years old, my mother had ran from my father. We lived with a lady. She started dating another man who became my stepfather, my little
Mhm.
sister's father, and he beat us incessantly. I mean, we weren't even his kids, so
Yeah.
he beat us incessantly, and
Mm.
we were taken out of the home when I was almost 3 years old
Oh wow.
and placed in foster care, where the
Mhm.
abuse continued even on a more horrific scale at that point.
Wow.
And so we were black and blue, taken out of the home. My mother completed all of her classes, but for
Mhm.
some reason they didn't make him do it. Now, mind you,
Mhm.
this is 43 years ago, 42 years ago, right? So there wasn't the
Right.
protection mechanisms in place.
Yeah.
And so it's just started from my youngest age and just continued throughout my whole entire childhood. I mean, I moved 14 times in 16 years that I can
Mhm.
recall, changing schools every single year, sometimes multiple times a year. I was
Right.
dropped off on the doorsteps of different adults at
Mm.
different times, taken from homes, moved across the country, literally kidnapped from school in the middle of the day when one
Wow.
parent came and took us with another one. I mean, it
Mhm.
was tumultuous and chaotic at an extreme level. Um,
Mhm.
and that fear that you really have of speaking up, like I didn't know any different. I don't even know that I realized then that anything was wrong because that was the
Right.
only thing that I ever knew. I didn't get a taste of something different. And there's so
Mhm.
many kids in our society that that's all they know. They might not
Mhm.
even realize that something's amiss and something's wrong. And that's why as
Right.
adults, we got to be very attuned to children, especially.
Yeah, I've often had conversations with kids from all age groups, elementary, middle, high school, that they share their story with me, and to them, it's like, well, it's just life. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's not. that's not supposed to be happening to you. And they often find themselves feeling like they are the blame for the abuse that they are that's being put onto them. Did you ever feel that way, that it was like, okay, well, this, I must have done something to make my father angry for this to be happening?
Well, absolutely. I think almost anybody who's been through childhood abuse feels that way because
Mhm.
the abuser always makes it, there's a sense of narcissism there for the abuser too. It's always about what somebody else did. Well,
Yeah.
if you wouldn't have did that, I wouldn't have hit you in the face with the belt. Like I was telling you not to do that and you're not listening. Right. So it's
Right. Right.
always
Right.
about the person that they're victimizing, never about themselves. And so you just get trained to do that. And I think another piece too is you just feel alone. You feel like
Mhm.
nobody's going to understand. You feel like if you say something, nobody cares.
Mhm.
If you say something, sure, like the courts may step in and intervene, but then they're going to put you back with your parent. And so there's all these
Yeah.
different things that kids are going through, that contingency plans that all of our brains do, where we're thinking 50 different million things happening that
Mhm.
keep us paralyzed in those moments. So absolutely, I felt like I was alone. I felt like nobody would understand.
Mhm.
I felt like it was my fault at times until I got a little bit older. If I
Mhm.
could just be good, if I could just be a little bit better, maybe that wouldn't happen to me. But the reality was
Mhm.
it didn't matter what I did. And I
Right.
was a really
Right.
good kid. So yeah, I think I felt that way. I think you probably did too, right?
Mm.
And like you said, you see that a lot from kids too.
Right. And I think that has a huge impact on, self-worth and self-esteem as well too, because where you don't want to do anything to be abused, so you're trying to stay on your abuser's good side, but it's like no matter what I do, it's gonna happen, so it makes I see it can make someone feel like, well, I'm just not good enough, or their self-esteem begins to deteriorate, where they start to like even, you know victimize themselves, or cause or
Mhm.
say that they are the blame because they aren't as good as the abuser thinks that they should be. I think that makes it even harder to kind of try to overcome during those times too.
I think, yeah, it manifests itself as adults. You see it with
Hmm.
adults all over the place too. It's like
Yep.
the lack of self-worth, those
Hmm.
self-limiting beliefs, being okay living in quiet desperation because they don't want to speak their truth for the fear of what somebody may think.
Right.
Um, Being a people pleaser, right? That might not even be seen as a bad. I just try to make everybody happy, but they're
Hmm.
miserable inside. Like you got to be able to make yourself happy first. You got to pour into
Right.
your own bucket. And so, I those traumas and those things that happen to us, you see it globally
Hmm.
and every. I don't care what diversity segment that you're looking at.
Hmm.
In every segment, race, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, none of it, like it's all lumped together with the things that all of us feel inside as we live in quiet desperation in our lives. And so it's really just about empowering people to take uncomfortable action, run through
Hmm.
fear, because on the other side of that truly is everything that your heart, your soul yearns for. It's just giving people the belief that that's what's there, which
Hmm.
is why I couldn't wait to come on your podcast because that's how I feel, you know?
Right, right. So, and you also are a inspirational speaker, right? So you have to travel and give these motivational speeches and stuff like that, and share your inspiring story about how you conquer these mountains and stuff. What led you to want to do that? To want to actually go out and begin to share your story?
Well, I've wanted to do that for 25 years, but I'll tell you
Mhm.
the moment that changed my life.
Mhm.
I had a young sailor that worked for me. Gosh, I can't believe I've been out of the Navy 6 years already. So it's probably, it's 16, maybe like 14 years ago now. Okay. A
Okay.
young sailor that worked for me. And I'm a guy like the kind of guy that's going to give you a hard time if you're walking past me. I love bantering with people. I love getting it back. And I
Mhm.
had about 250 sailors working for me at this command. And I sat just outside of where all their desks were at, right? Give them a little privacy
Mhm.
while they're doing work during the day. So they would walk past my desk and give me a hard time most of the time before I could them, right?
Mhm.
And there's a young sailor and she walks past my desk and she was one that would like rib me for the second she saw me in the morning. About the third time she walks past my desk, I say, "Hey, she's gonna keep walking past my desk, not even say good morning, not say nothing."
Right.
She goes, "I'm just not having a good day."
Mm.
And I said, "You all right?" She goes, "Not really." I said, "Let's take a walk." Because one of the gifts I received from my traumatic experiences was massive empathy. I could feel
Yeah,
somebody's pain almost,
absolutely.
right? That's a gift.
Mhm.
And I said, let's take a walk. And we go take a walk, and we're walking through the hallways of the organization of the command that I was in. And I could just feel there's like pain she wants to tell me about, but she just
Mhm.
doesn't know how to say it. And I start to give her just some snippets of what I would tell people about my abusive past,
Mhm.
just to build a bridge of commonality there where it created a safe space for her.
Mm.
I got maybe 2 or 3 sentences out and she just poured it out.
Yeah.
And she had been abused sexually abused by multiple men. Her mother knew part of that in her childhood and kept
Mm.
dating all these men. And as a new mother, she was really struggling with this. She was so
Yeah.
angry and full of pain. It brought up all these emotions as a new mother that she had suppressed, that she didn't heal from. She suppressed. And
Mhm.
so, ironically enough, and she's telling a man this, right? But it's
Right.
because I opened the safe space. She ends up allowing me to help her get some help. There was a young therapist on the base, female, that helped her. And you could see this woman over the course of 6 months that we were at the same command together. You could
Mhm.
see her like glow coming back, her excitement coming
Mm.
back, her personality coming back. She felt like she mattered. She felt like she was seen. And if you're out there like, and you feel like you don't matter and you feel like you're not seen, this is why we do this. I see
Mhm.
you. Like your story does matter. And so she transfers. I
Mhm.
transfer 3 months later. A year almost to the day that we started, that
Mm.
she told me that. Comes and finds me at a different organization in Virginia that I was in. She walks in and I'm like, oh my gosh, hey, hey, pleasantries and all that. She goes,
Mhm.
okay, it's my turn to ask you to go for a walk.
Mm.
We go walking through the hallways and um, man, I get every time I tell the story, even this many years later, I get really choked up.
Yeah.
And she sits me down on the bench outside, just outside, and she goes, hey, like, I want to tell you that you were the first man that I've ever met that didn't want something from me.
Wow. Mm.
And she goes, you saved my life that day. I was thinking about taking my life,
Mm.
and you saved my life because you saw me. And I couldn't say anything. And I'm not a speechless kind of guy, right? Like, I couldn't
Yeah.
say anything.
Mhm.
And because it's not a compliment, it's the most humbling thing another human being can ever say to you
Right.
is you saved their life.
Mm.
And I didn't know my story. Like all the things I went through in my childhood were going to catapult me to do what I'm doing today. And I didn't know it then. But as much as she feels like I saved her life, she changed mine.
Mhm.
Because what I found for the first time, and I've done a lot of healing at this point,
Mhm.
was not like me gaining my power back, me, speaking my truth and me doing the healing work where I could feel good enough to tell somebody snippets.
Mhm.
It really helped me understand the power in my story and what it can do for other people by removing that stigma of trauma and mental health that everybody is so scared to talk about because of the fear of
Yes.
judgment.
Right.
And so I wanted to do this the whole time, right? In corporate America, I retired from the Navy as an intel officer, went into
Mhm.
corporate America, promoted 4 times in 5 years, like did really well, and got to the point where I had the money, I had the boat, I had the nice house, I had been married 22 years, had great teenage daughters. I had what life says is everything.
Mhm.
And I ended up having a nervous breakdown, working myself literally to death.
Mm.
And April 8th of a year ago. And I realized as we got so busy and I'm in these executive meetings and I couldn't lead the leaders that I was responsible for because
Mhm.
that's my jam. I love leading and development. It's what I do. I couldn't do that because I was so busy for 12 hours a day on Zoom calls because our work tripled when COVID hit.
Mm.
And I wasn't in the office anymore. We were isolated, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to give them a couple hours at the end of the day, but I'm still working 14 hours with the family. And I thought I was having a heart attack, and it was my first ever panic attack. And I haven't had one
Mhm.
since, thank God.
Yeah.
But I had one. And, but do you know what it was? I wasn't living in my purpose.
Mm.
My purpose is really to help people, whether it's developing leaders or whether it's speaking. And
Mhm.
so we had this moment, and my wife and I talked. She goes, I've been begging you to write your book for a decade. She goes, people need to hear your story. She
Yeah.
goes, but you wanted to speak for 25 years. She goes, screw it. Let's just go for it.
Yeah.
And it has been the biggest blessing on my life. Charles, I didn't even realize the joy I missed out on until I started doing this. And
Right.
I love it. I love it. I've spoken at hospitals, spoken at Rotary clubs in towns.
Mhm.
I've done some school stuff. And now it's like opening up. It's like the breadth of what's opening up
Yeah.
is amazing. talking about choices and running through fear and healing from trauma. And when I see people taking that advice, taking the belief, healing themselves, but more importantly, bringing people along with them that are still walking in the darkness,
Mm.
oh, it don't get no better than that. I mean, how could you live a life better than that? And I
Yeah.
couldn't have done it without all the trauma, all the darkness, all the pain, and everything that I went through. So my life was happening for me all along, even through those hardest things. It was
Mhm.
happening for me for this moment today.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to pour that belief into people, even the darkest times. Even the darkest times. Keep moving because your spirit is unbreakable. And
Mhm.
keep moving because your story will be the manifest that saves somebody's life because you chose to save your own. Man, it's a beautiful journey.
You got me kind of fired up right now, man.
Let's go.
They often say, you get dealt these deck of cards, you can get dealt a hand and, play the hand that you were dealt, but, your deck, your hand was, insurmountably stacked against you, from, day one. And to be able to take that bad hand that you were dealt and play that hand to where now you're not just thriving in life, but you're coaching people, you're coaching leaders of the world today in businesses and schools and hospitals, and people hear you on radio stations and podcasts, and your story is all over the world now, and that is inspiring other people to conquer those same mountains that they're going through, even if it's not something that is similar, but they can see you, and God is kind of like you. God is using you as a a demonstration, in a
Mm,
sense where you have gone through these things that you've endured, you've conquered them. Now you're sharing your story and help other people to conquer those mountains as well too. So I greatly appreciate all the work that you're doing, man. I mean, you got me fired up to gotta just go out there and thrive in life and stuff too, to conquer some mountains of goals that I
let's
have,
go.
So I definitely appreciate everything that you're doing. And there was one thing I wanted to ask you about. It was your 4 keys to living an
Mm.
extraordinary life. Can you share what that is and what that means?
Oh man, this is my jam. I
Mhm.
didn't even know I was learning these 4 keys, guys, by the way. So everybody listening, during my healing journey, this is how I got to the point of being who I am today, to feeling like life happens for me, not to me, to knowing my history doesn't define my legacy. There's a lot of things that I did unknowingly to just
Mhm.
continue to move forward. Sometimes it was an inch step, sometimes it was a mile
Mhm.
bounding step, right? So what I do now is through master classes and some other stuff, and through my speaking things that I do, I talk about the keys to living an extraordinary life, and these 4 keys that I learned in this process. And the first thing that I talk to people about is speaking your truth. Oh man, like let me tell you, Charles.
Mhm.
My whole life I felt like I was suppressed, right? And this feeling of almost being confined in a box or like drowning in the water. And the first time, that time that I spoke my truth and my father was arrested, I felt horrible he was arrested. But it was like empowering because for
Mhm.
the first time I said what happened to me.
Right.
And therapy and counseling is amazing and people need that. So don't ever shy away from that if you need it.
Mhm.
They teach you different things. They teach you
Right.
to put your pain in a balloon. They teach you to write what happened to you and put it in a fire. But what
Mhm.
counseling really does is give you an opportunity to speak your truth. What
Yeah.
talking to somebody like me does is give you an opportunity to speak your truth. And
Yeah.
it's like drowning your whole life and coming up for air for the first time, like, I can breathe.
Right.
Oh my gosh. And it's like this weight lifted and this pat drops off your back because you had the courage to speak your truth. So find counselor, a therapist, a trusted loved one, trusted friend. If you feel like you don't have somebody, find me and I will give you
Mhm.
the opportunity to speak your truth because I know the power that comes with it and
Right.
it's transformative. And so the second thing I teach people is accepting what happened to you for what it was. There's so many times I see people, this part was easier. The second piece of this is going to be what was hard for me. I was abused. I was locked in
Mhm.
closets. I was chained to beds. I was horrifically abused, smacked, kicked, punched, thrown, all of it, thrown against walls, all of it.
Mm.
That doesn't change no matter how I feel. So I have a choice. Do I sit in the pain of what I've always known, or do I unlock the boxes of pain that is the trauma that are sitting inside of me, speak my truth and get it out so I can replace that with love? The challenge is the fear of the unknown of what's going to happen when you unlock these secrets that you've been hanging on to. What you
Right.
realize, it's the shame you let go. And so accepting what happened to you for what it is. Don't sugarcoat it.
Mhm.
Just it's black or white. The next thing, part of that piece of that second step, is acknowledging the feelings that come with it. That was harder for me as a man. I was angry in my young adulthood.
Mhm.
For me, it was like, I'm not going to let them hold me back. I'm not going to let them continue to put me down. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. And it was anger that made me take my first steps in healing,
Mhm.
because I didn't want to continue the generational cycle. What happened is, as I learned that that hurt little boy that was still inside of me needed that healing, and I looked at those feelings and I acknowledged that I was in pain, acknowledged that I felt like I lost part of my childhood, it allowed me to let go of the pain I was holding on because of it.
Mhm.
Like, like for me, that was hard. And I transitioned
Mhm.
to healing because I loved myself and I loved my now wife of 22 years. She was my girlfriend,
Mhm.
and my future children that are now teenagers, right?
Mhm.
I wanted them, they deserved the best of me. I deserved the best of me. But if I didn't accept what happened to me and acknowledge the feelings around it, I would have sat in the uncomfortable pain and continued to victimize myself over and over and over again, even though I hadn't been abused at that point for years. The third thing is forgiveness. Boy, let me tell you, that one was hard for me. Why would I forgive the people that hurt me? Why would I let them off the hook?
Mhm.
Screw them. That's what I used to think. What
Mhm.
I realized is that hurt people hurt other people. And
Right.
every single person that hurt me had been victimized themselves. But because they never let go of that pain, it became uncontrollable and they generationally abused me. They continued the cycle, right? That's
Mhm.
why we see it in families. What I realized is that anger I held on to, like for them, that
Mhm.
contentment, that pain, that shame, that embarrassment, what I was hanging on to for them was eroding. It was like poison in my soul.
Right.
And I had the antidote, and that was forgiveness. So for me, like my spirituality comes from God. So I laid that pain at the feet of God that I was feeling for me.
Mhm.
And then I had to make the decision to say, I'm going to forgive them because I know that they were hurt. It didn't make it
Mhm.
okay. It didn't mean I still didn't have boundaries,
Right.
right? I didn't run and go tell them, I forgive you. You could go live your life. They were already living miserably still.
Mhm.
It allowed me to live in joy and happiness that I was missing out on because that pain wasn't poisoning my soul anymore.
Mhm.
That pain, I let that go and I replaced that space with love.
Right.
And then the last thing is exposing your superpowers. Charles, look, I'm telling you,
Mhm.
when you go through these events, when you do these things, the people I know who've been through trauma are the most empathy, grit filled, resilient, compassionate, like initiative filled people I've ever met because they have perspective on what could be. I couldn't live my life like I feel like I'm a super powerful person
Mhm.
today because of every single thing that I went through. But if you would have told me this 20 years ago, I might have put some hands on you. That's
Right.
just the reality because I'd have
Yeah.
been pissed. What you mean
Right.
I should I'm gonna expose my superpowers? What you mean gifts for my trauma? Now that
Mhm.
I've healed and I see what I've received, the empathy, the compassion, like that I used to stutter. I was told I was intelligible and garbled as a
Mhm.
3-year-old. It's in court documentation. And I'm
Wow.
able to speak and breathe life into people in a way that maybe they've never heard. What
Right.
a blessing on my life because of all the things that I went through. I wrote my book because of all the things that I went through.
Mhm.
It happened for me to allow me to live in this moment in the way that I'm living it. So stop living small. Stop sitting in the fear and the pain. Run through it. Run through it into your life's abundance. Own your story, own
Mhm.
your power, expose your superpowers, and unlock the pieces of your soul that are yearning for more. Like that's what's waiting for us on the other side of that fear.
Man, I'm speechless, man. I mean, that is so powerful. Like, we often talk about forgiveness, and sometimes people will say, "Oh, you're too quick to forgive." But forgiveness isn't really for that person. It's really for us, so we can heal, so we can move forward and move on. I've had my traumas to work out, with my father and the things that he did when I was growing up as a child, and even like you mentioned, like I'm an adult. I'm angry. I don't even live in the house anymore. It's been like
Mm-hmm.
5 or 6 years. I'm thriving in life. I got a great job. I'm married, and moved into our own place. I bought a house and got a car. Got my wife a car. Like things is going great, making the most money I ever made. And I'm like, still dealing with this trauma, and I'm still
Yes.
dealing with the pain from it. And even when I would talk to my wife about it, like, I'm getting angrier and angrier and angrier about the situation. And she ended up telling me kind of like how you thought as well, that you're not going to change them. You're not going to
Mm.
change them. They have to do that on their own. But what you can do is forgive and move on, and grow from it, in a sense.
Yeah.
So that whole thing you did there was definitely hit home for me, because that's something that I had to endure myself as well too, dealing with childhood trauma.
You know
We
what's cool? Oh, sorry. Let
no,
me,
go
let
ahead.
me say this piece because it's a so important piece of what you just said. I can't let this go without saying it. Trauma doesn't get tired. It will
Right.
chase you. You can't hide from it. It will find you.
Hmm.
Like either continue to make the choice to stay uncomfortable or like you did. It's what's so beautiful about that, right? Like your wife told you like you did.
Hmm.
Instead, forgive so you can move forward as the
Hmm.
person that you're meant to be because success and things do not provide happiness. Letting go of the traumas, forgiving, but
Hmm.
by the way, they never knew. I forgave them, right? I've
Right.
seen my mom even forgive herself now. She's 100 plus days sober for the first time in her life, bro.
Wow.
She
Wow.
asked me, she goes, "How did you really do it?" I said, "Mom, I'll help you, but not as your son.
Mhm.
I don't want to hear the buts and becauses,
Yeah.
but I'll help you." She's the only person I was like, "I forgave you," right? I'm like, I
Right. Right.
forgave you a long time ago because I needed to do that to you.
Right.
That wasn't for you. The forgiveness was for me and mom.
Mhm.
But you got to learn not only to forgive the people who caused your trauma, but you also, and this is an important piece of forgiveness, you got to learn to give yourself a little grace and forgiveness too.
Mhm.
And she said, "I know I was a terrible mom." And I said, "But it's not because you wanted to be a terrible mom. You didn't have the capacity to be a better mother because
Right.
you didn't even love yourself. So how were you supposed to love your children?
Mhm.
And you weren't a good mom. That is what it is. We can't change that, but we could do today and tomorrow and the
Right.
next day and
Right.
however much longer we got on this earth to do." And she
Mhm.
just visited me for 2 weeks. And
Wow.
it was the best time I've ever like it
Yeah.
was the best time I've ever had in life with my mother. And
Yeah.
I could see her joy and I could see she didn't feel awkward around me. And she didn't wasn't like, "Oh, I was a terrible mother." We just built our relationship moving forward. So this
Right.
can heal families too.
Mhm.
But it all starts in here. It all starts
Right.
with you, just like it did for you too.
Right.
Like this is what this is about.
That's powerful. So you and your mother have a better relationship now, that you have gone through this healing process as well too.
We do. I mean, I had to create boundaries with her,
Yeah.
right? She was
Yeah.
drinking and drunk all the time and or doing drugs her whole life because she was masking her own pain and
Yeah.
being self-destructive. So I had to
Mhm.
create boundaries and create separation for my own mental health and my own peace. I still
Mhm.
forgave.
Yeah.
I understood she didn't have the capacity to love me like I wanted my mother to love me in those
Right.
moments.
Right.
So I still forgave, but and hoped and prayed that one day she could show up as a mother that I needed her to be. But I knew she was only able to show up as a mother that she was. So, I mean, I even rekindled my relationship with my father. He's
Okay.
passed now, but I rekindled the relationship with him. And I had really firm and strict boundaries on that, bro. Like
Yeah.
I wanted to be a good son too, right? Like there
Mhm.
was still that love there. There were
Right.
times when he'd lose his temper and I'm like, "Oh, boundary, you exceeded it, cut you off,"
Right. Right.
because I got to protect me. So the boundaries are for us to
Mhm.
protect our own mental health and our own joy. The forgiveness is for us to protect our own mental health, our own joy, and our
Right.
own soul. Everything we're doing around trauma is for us to
Mhm.
heal. It has nothing to do with anybody else. It's all about creating the best person that you could be
Mhm.
inside and really just living the life you deserve.
Yeah.
And we know it, Charles, right? Like you know it,
Right. Right.
I know it because we
Mhm.
walked this journey. And you've got people that have walked this journey that are helping guide you on the path.
Mhm.
You just have to be willing to run through the fear and that darkness that's standing in front of you and believe through our stories
Mhm.
that the light is waiting for you on the other side. And not only is the light waiting, but you're going to
Right.
turn around and light the path in the darkness for the next person
Right. Right.
by doing it for yourself first.
Mhm. I greatly appreciate that. I definitely appreciate the comment that you made about boundaries, and that boundaries are okay. You don't have to just because you want to move at your pace. This is your healing. This is that person's individual healing, and you have to put those boundaries in place. Otherwise, you may find yourself still dealing with the same trauma or dealing with those same, trying to forever to unpack those emotions and not being able to because you're moving too quickly or you're allowing this person to come back in too fast. So setting those boundaries definitely, I definitely appreciate that comment as well too.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you so much, man. This is I know you're blazing the trail for a lot of people out there in the world, and you're helping people to remove their own barriers that's keeping them from their own healing and to be able to process those traumas that they've experienced. I definitely appreciate you for coming on to the podcast today and sharing your story, but also leaving some breadcrumbs for other people who may be going through some similar experiences or some not so similar experiences, but even just to help them to push through those barriers and make those breakthroughs and make those strides and overcome those hardships, and even deal with the own trauma that they're dealing with. So I greatly appreciate everything that you're doing and joining us on the I Am Conquering Mountains podcast. You are truly an inspiration. I hope and pray that you continue to let God use you, because he gives us his toughest battles to his toughest soldiers. And my friend, you are a tough soldier, man. And I'm greatly appreciative and thankful that our paths have crossed. And definitely want to make sure that we stay in contact with each other too.
Yeah, I tell you, thank you for allowing me to be on today. I believe, if you feel blessed, you can be a blessing for somebody else. And
Absolutely.
you allowing me the blessing to come onto your podcast and then us working together to help provide somebody else the blessing. And I want you to remember this because I think it's so appropriate for your name, like the I Am Conquering Mountains podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Think about every time you climb the mountain, you get stronger. The mountains are made to make us stronger, more resilient, and just a more amazing person. And anytime you've conquered a mountain, I want you to think about this if you're listening to this. Anytime you've conquered a mountain, anytime you ran through the fear, anytime you thought you couldn't do it and you kept ascending, when you got to the top of that mountain, it's beautiful.
Absolutely.
The joy is in the climb. The joy isn't on the downside of that. The joy is in the climb. Like the resilience, the grit, the power you gain is from the climb. The strength you gain is from the climb. So keep climbing that mountain. You are not alone.
Absolutely.
We are here for you. There's so many people who have done it. We will continue to climb mountains our entire life because we're constantly growing. Get to the top, take it in, look at the brilliance in front of you, the joy and the abundance, and turn around and put your hand out there to help that person that's behind you climbing that mountain up too. So it's just been a blessing to be here. And if anybody wants to find me, they can go to waltmckinley.com. There's everything from masterclasses to hiring me to be a speaker, whatever that looks like on there. Social media links. It's a one-stop shop for anything you're looking for. But thank you again. I appreciate you allowing me the blessing to be here with you today.
Absolutely. I thank you for the privilege of having you to come on too, for coming on. And I'll definitely post your website link and your social media accounts if someone wants to find you, to reach out and give you a message. But I definitely know this is going to bless a lot of people. So hang tight as absolutely. So hang tight as I stop the recording real quick.